Hey there, sweet friends. It's Gina. Welcome to the Rebookery channel. Today I'm going to flip through my 24 Forlorn Fabric Journals that I have created. So I'm going to start with this picture of them all stacked up nice and neat. I'm going to show you some inspiration, and then I will flip through, show you what they look like on the inside, and then I will show you all the different covers.
Okay, welcome. So let me show you the inspiration and what I was thinking when I made these Forlorn Fabric Journals. And I'm going to call them Forlorn Fabrics because they are made of primarily thrifted and recycled and scrap materials. There are some new materials in them, as always, because you just have to have that structure and the integrity of some newer scrapbook papers when you mix them with the old. But they are made of all thrifted and recycled fabrics and trims. So my inspiration came from these two books that I've been reading this winter. I got them from Uppercase. I think they have a magazine, like a monthly magazine, but they had these three books. There's actually one more called Botanica. I originally got them because of this one right here for feed sacks, which feed sacks are just amazing, and I've always been obsessed with them because the very first quilt block that I got from my grandmother, which was from her mother, so it was my great-grandma. My great-grandma had made a feed sack quilt block, and when my grandma and I started quilting back when I was probably about 18, 19 years old, my grandma gave me a quilt block from my great-grandma, and it was made from feed sacks, although at the time I didn't know what a feed sack was. And so my very first quilt I made is actually made around the one quilt block that Grandma Swope had. And it was a feed sack. Well, that fast forward, 20 some odd years, and the quilt is still intact, but Grandma Swope's block has deteriorated. I mean, it's threadbare. The quilt, I still use it. It's downstairs. We use it all the time. But as I got older, I realized that those were feed sacks that she had made that quilt block out of. So anyway, so this has been on my table, and I have been reading this and doing a lot of research on feed sacks and stuff like that. And this was kind of my inspiration because of just the whole origin of feed sacks. And I really wanted these journals to resemble this era, especially like the 1930s during the Dust Bowl, and the thriftiness, the frugality, the prudence that was going along during that time, and using things over and over and over again rather than throwing things away and just, starting new. So this was my primary inspiration, just because, I don't know, these things are just beautiful, just beautiful. And then my other one was this book called Stitch-a-Lo, and it's got a bunch of different, I got string all over me, it's got a bunch of different stitching artists in here, and every one of them, oh my gosh, is just lovely, and there's just so much inspiration. Like I can't even wrap my brain around this. But in particular, this Mandy Patullo, this artist right here, the way she was using old, worn out textiles, quilt tops, quilts, feed sacks, vintage fabric or antique fabrics, laces and trims, and just the way she mishmashed everything together, but yet it looked like it just belonged. And I mean, just like this right here, I just could look at this all day, every day, and get a whole new, inspiration, a whole new thing of inspiration each time I look at her work. So that was another of my inspirations, and this has been a lot of what you've been seeing like in my Homebodies collections. You can see I've been pulling a lot from the way she uses fabric and the way a lot of these artists use fabric. I've been pulling on their expertise and trying to incorporate that and mix it with paper in my journals. So these are the two books that, and I will link to Uppercase magazine. I will link to their website there. I know they have that in Instagram, so I'll link that so you guys can check these out if you want to. So from there, I have also in the past, oh my gosh, I've always collected, thrifted, and vintage fabrics, but I have been doing it obsessively since about, I don't know, I want to say last October when I went to that epic estate sale I've mentioned a million times, and I had bought a bunch of feed sacks there and a bunch of quilt tops and quilt blocks and things like that. So I've really been obsessed with this whole vintage fabric thing. And so here are some of them. These are my vintage pillowcases, which I'll talk about here in a second. But these are some quilt tops, and the quilt tops I got from a fabric recycling store. So this was, someone had made this and discarded it and wasn't able to complete it, and so it wound up in the store, and I was able to snatch it. So these guys they're not perfect. In fact, this one is really not perfect. It was very unsquare. And when I bought it, the lady who owned the store, she's like, somehow I just knew that quilt top was going to go home with you, just because it was so odd and it wasn't like pieced together correctly. Anyway, so you can see there's little tears and stuff in it. So these quilt tops that I got, again, reminded me of those books, because this is just a mishmash of fabrics, some older fabrics, some some cheaper fabrics, possibly some feed sacks. And so I just knew I wanted to do something special with these guys, but I just couldn't quite wrap my brain around how I was going to incorporate them and still maintain, their beauty and their eclecticness. So I stumbled across these guys, and I've also been collecting these guys, vintage sheets, and I'm going to do a whole separate video on this because, this is just a whole other, oh my gosh, like I am so obsessed with these. But basically, I have tons of these vintage sheets, and I have cleaned them up and I have torn them up, and they are now usable fabric. So I knew I wanted to use the sheets, and I knew I wanted to use the quilt tops. Another thing that I wanted to use in these journals was I wanted to use an eclectic mix of pages. So in these journals, there are 3 signatures, and they have, let's see, there's 10, so there's 20 in the first signature, there's 10 in the middle signature, and then there's 20 in the third signature, and then if you did fronts and backs, that would be times 2. So I just wanted an eclectic mix of pages. I wanted some sewing and crafting pages. I wanted some wildflower garden themed pages. I wanted some fun, playful, retro to kind of go with the mishmash of colors. And so I pulled some children's book pages. This one is on science experiments, and it just has groovy colors. Like the colors I pulled for this book, I know these look a lot of black and whites, but there's a lot of pages like this that are, and you can see I still have string all over me. And then this book was a Mccall's Golden Book, and it was all about crafts and sewing, and just look at the colors on this. So this book and the science experiment book have really thick matte finish paper, and it would be great for journaling. And like I said, look at these colors, and I mean, that's just so much inspiration. So I pulled some pages from here, and then I also pulled lots of envelopes, and I got really creative with envelopes. I pulled some graph paper and grid paper and ledger paper. And then I also tried to use up, because I wanted this to be going back to the whole 1930s Dust Bowl frugality type of thing. I wanted to use things that of course, you know, nobody wants anymore or have been discarded or we just don't know how to use them. And I wanted to find new ways for them. So photo albums, even ones that, you know, were made not too long ago, you see them all the time and they're like 99 cents a piece. Every time I go to a thrift store, I always see 4 or 5 of them, and sometimes they're like $1/4 a piece. And they have those slick pages. And so I was like, there's got to be a way to use those little pocket pages. Not like these with the binders. This one has a binder in it, but the ones that were, you know, like sewn in or glued in. So I found a way to use some photo album pages in these journals also. Now that I've showed you everything that I've used to get going with these journals, let me show you the 24 Forlorn Fabric Journals that I have created. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the quilt top ones. I have 10 quilt tops. Besides, all 24 of these have the same components on the inside. It's just different pages, different colors, different book pages, but they're all set up the exact same way. But for the quilt tops, each one of these is different in that you were getting a different section from the quilt top. You're getting a different quilt top because I had 2 different ones that I was working from, and you're going to get some different trims. So even I color coordinated and thought about every single thing that went into these journals, all the way down to even the thread that I used to stitch with. So and the thread, I had 2 of my sewing machines set up, and so I had different threads in each one, and I made sure that I used particular colors at particular times. So again, I wanted to keep this with that whole mishmash, mix and match, eclectic, just going to make do with what you have. That was kind of what I was thinking when I was making these journals, is these are kind of like make do journals. If I was back in the 1930s and I wanted to make a book or a journal of some sort, I'm not going to run to the store and go buy one. What I'm going to use is things that I have laying around the house. And that's what I was thinking about. I imagined, you know, a young lady that was sitting at her desk in her house, and she's finding all of these found papers and ephemera and fabrics, and she's stitching them together with frugalness and using possibly feed sacks or dish towels or quilt tops or pillowcases that have already had a previous life. So that's what you're going to see in these. They are not perfect. They are kind of wonky, and they're wonky for a reason, because if you were in the 30s or 40s and you were stitching these and you were using your found materials and just your stitching skills, your handmade stitching skills, you're going to have a lot of things that some people might see as imperfections. I personally see it as character, and to me it just makes, I don't know, it just makes these that much more special. So yeah, okay, so let me walk you through one of the insides, and then I will show you each of the different covers. All right, so this is what your journal will look like. It is going to be quilted and fabriced all the way around. It is tied or secured with a vintage sheet that has been ripped and then is secured. Either this one actually has an eyelet. This is the only one that I did an eyelet. All the rest of them actually have the sheet sewn in to the trim. You'll get some sort of my vintage or thrifted trim on the front, and then, you know, just some random different bits. You're gonna have all kinds of crazy stitches throughout the whole book, and then, like I said, you'll have 3 signatures. Now, how I made this book was I used some Currier and Ives calendar pages, and they go from, gosh, I want to say I have, so they go from the 70s all the way up to, I think 1989 was the oldest one. I think I might have a couple 1967s, but anyway. Okay, one time, like 2 or 3 years ago, I found this gigantic garbage sack of Currier and Ives calendars, and I use the calendar pages all the time. But the calendars themselves had this thick cardstock, I guess it was the cover of the calendars, and I just could not figure out what I wanted to do with these, and I've held on to them forever. Finally figured out what to do with them. They actually, when I cut them down, they came out to be the perfect size, and then because they are so sturdy but they're flexible, I was able to make the journal actually out of this. So this is the substrate that the journals are made out of. They're made out of these Currier and Ives calendar page covers. So from there, I've got to go through and I got to finish up. I've got pockets and stuff that I've added, and then you'll have a pocket that I've sewn in. But then here are the 3 signatures that you'll get. So, photo album page that I've stitched to some scrapbook paper, grid or graph paper, a sheet of some wallpaper, some ledger paper that I've turned into a pocket, a thinner piece of scrapbook paper, a page from a crochet or an embroidery book, piece of notebook paper or tablet paper that is kind of old and yellowed, some children's book pages, cardstock. There will be some trim throughout the book that when I made the journal covers, I had a lot of scraps left over from the quilt tops, and so I took those and I stitched those in the book. So you're going to see a lot of fabric trim that comes from those quilt tops. Okay, so that's the first signature. For the middle signature, I used my stash of envelopes because I have hundreds of envelopes just sitting around. I don't know if I've ever told you, but Kansas City, Missouri is the Hallmark headquarters. And so we find tons of Hallmark and American Greetings, Ambassador. We find a lot of those stationery cards and wrapping paper and stuff at estate sales and thrift stores here in the Kansas City area. So I scored a whole bunch of envelopes, and I've just been trying to figure out a way to use them. So what I did was I sewed them together and I made a pocket, and you'll see the other end over here. So scrapbook paper, book page, wildflower page. Then here are 2 envelopes that I've sewed together. So you've got a pocket here. It's been stitched to another envelope. And then your book page, scrapbook paper, and then the other side of that first envelope. So then the third signature is just like the first one. It'll have a photo album page stitched to some scrapbook paper, more heavy scrapbook paper, cardstock type of material, grid or graph, a shorter piece of like cardstock that's printed on one side, ledger paper, scrapbook paper, some sort of cross stitch or embroidery paper, a piece of paper that I got from an estate sale where the gentleman, I think, was an artist, and so he just had tons of sketch paper and drawing paper, watercolor paper. So it's a little bit thicker. It's not like copy paper or anything. It's thicker than that. It's got a matte finish. And then scrapbook paper again with your quilt trim, book paper. There's a little envelope that is sewed to the other side of that short piece of cardstock scrapbook paper. And then on the back of your journal, or on the, I don't know, I guess I want to say inside back, you will have a piece of wallpaper or fabric. So it'll vary between the journals, but a piece of wallpaper or fabric that becomes a pocket. And then over on the right-hand side, I'm going to go in and put a clear packing envelope. I just wanted to show you really quickly an up close of what the inside will look like. So again, I'm going back to this is not perfect, and this is kind of just pieced together
that's the whole style I was going for. So you're going to see exposed stitching. Now, if that's not your cup of tea, you could do one of two things. One being you don't purchase because this would drive you nuts. Or you could also cover this up. I deliberately left this, raw so that, one, you could see the stitching because that is kind of a cool design. The other thing is you can cover over this with your own artwork or collage. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that you're going to see that exposed stitching on the insides of all of these journals. That's why I did not cover these with fabric. I had made some fabric journals before. They were a lot smaller. They were a different design. And I didn't use a quilt top. I actually used vintage sheets. I think I did that a couple of years ago in my shop, and I finished the inside edges. I did finish it with, I think, wrapping paper or maybe more fabric. But this time I did not finish it because I want those stitches to be exposed. That's part of the whole feel that I have going on with these journals. So there you go. That's what the insides look like. And every single one of them has the same components. They're just going to be different colors, different prints, but I pulled from all the same materials. So I'm not going to flip through all of them. I would rather show you guys the covers. So here's this one with some pretty, and I know this cannot be vintage, but I got a bunch of like a Walmart stack of trims at a thrift store a while ago, and I know this can't be vintage. This has got to be newer, but it was at a thrift store, and oh my gosh, why would somebody get rid of it? That is the most gorgeous stuff. And then this I do know is some old needlework, and I love this fabric. This one has a lot of oranges and greens. Okay, so there's that one. This one, oh, I love this trim. It almost looks like smocking, but it's not. It's more needlework with some lace on it. And then you can see the quilt top. This pretty fabric. And then the stitching. This trim, I had the most fun with these guys because I got to use all of my fun trims that I have. I have a ton of trims, and I loved being able to pull them out and use them. So this one's got really fun trim. You can see. And the pockets that I have sewn on the inside are either going to be a hanky, or it will be a like a piece of quilt scrap, like a 4x4 square, and it'll either be that, or I think I have 2 or 3 of them that actually have a lace pocket. But you can see what I mean by imperfections. Like this is just, it's soft, but yet it's durable, but the fabric is kind of pillowing, and it's just, I don't know, this is just, to me, this is a totally frugal type of journal. Like, I don't know, I just love that it's not perfect. And you're gonna have a lot of strings hanging off of it because these edges are not finished, and that was totally my intent. I want this to look worn. I want this to look textured. I want this to look like you have you've used this, you've loved this, you've taken it with you everywhere you go, and it's just been your travel journal. So that's why I left so much unfinished and some strings and things like that. Now this one, I had a time with this one. I do love the trim on this though, this pretty pink trim, which I'm sure is not vintage, but the absolute fabric, yes, that is vintage. And then I got crazy with my stitching. Had some trouble on the side of this one, so I put an envelope, put a piece of fabric on the envelope, and then just stitched in some lace here. So you'll have, this will be a pocket, and then on the inside I put a piece of wallpaper, and then this is a piece of vintage sheet. This is the edging of that. So there's like 2 or 3 of them that will kind of be like this. And whoops.
So crinkly and wrinkly, that was kind of what I was thinking. I love the bright colors on this one. And then just pieces of lace. Like this was just a piece of lace and just a piece of fabric that was just a scrap laying around. And I just, you know, everything that came off of these guys or came out of when I was cutting it, I put it right back in my pile and I just used it to stitch onto other pages or use on other journals. Again, another scrap of lace. And honestly, I don't know if you can tell this or not, but this is like an angel, and this was a piece of lace angel, and so I cut it in. So I cut this part off. So here's this part, and then you'll in a couple journals, I actually took the bottom and cut it in half and used it as pockets, and some pom-pom trim. And then little pocket here. Love the fabrics on that one. Okay, I just was going back and looking at the video and saw that there were 3 quilt top journals that I did not show you guys because I had them setting on something else. So let me show you those really quickly. Okay, this one is a really fun, bright colored one. In this part of the quilt top, there was a lot of green or a lot of blues and a lot of pinks. And so I played off of that. I put some fun little fringe on here, some really, really old, I don't even know if it's lace. I don't know what this is, but it is really old and super yellowed. And then this one has a fun little blue and yellow trimmed pocket with some pink stitching that I did. This one, again, has some of that fun flowered trim. And again, I don't think that's vintage, but it was thrifted. And this one, ooh, love that, has yellow for the stitching. And then this fun little pocket right here. And I was thinking about, wouldn't be fun to have a button right here? I may end up and sew a button on this one. We'll see. If I have time this week, I will sew a button on this one because I feel like a button needs to go right there. And then the last one was, again, with that purple pom-pom fringe, some really old lace work here. This one has a lot of greens and a lot of yellows, and so it has the yellow orange stitching, and there's a little fun pocket on the inside. So yeah, I had forgotten they were sitting here and I had forgotten to show those. So, oh gosh, and now I got string all over me. So I will insert this into the video. Now let me show you the vintage sheets ones. So the thing with the vintage sheets, and like I said, I'm going to do an entire video on my vintage sheets, and oh my gosh, like, before you freak out, just know these are ultra cleaned. ultra. I know you might get the heebie-jeebies when you think vintage sheets. No. Let me, oh my gosh. Like, you don't even know how good this smells. I wish I had smell-o-vision right now, because smell-o-YouTube, oh my gosh, because these smell so good. I have a whole process that I go through, and I'll go through that when I do my fat quarters video and all that good stuff. But basically, with the vintage sheets, the reason why I use them is because you can get great amounts of fabric, and they're repurposed. So I can get, like, out of a pillowcase, I can get 2 fat quarters, and I'll explain what a fat quarter is later in a video, but basically it's about an 18-inch by 22-inch piece of fabric. Well, it just so happened that my fat quarters that I have already cut down or ripped up, with that 18 by 22 inch, I was able to get 2 journals out of 1 fat quarter. So because of that, the vintage sheet journals, I have 2 of each design, if that makes any sense. I know that was a long explanation to explain that I have 2 of each design. And again, they're going to look alike on the outside, but the inside is where they're going to differ a little bit. They may have a different, fabric pocket, but their pages will be different designs, like different scrapbook paper, different pages from books. They all have the same wallpaper. and they all have the same ledger paper and things like that. So you can kind of see it's just different variations of the same pages. So for each one of these, what I'm going to do in the Etsy shop is I will just take a picture of one of them and I will list it, but I'll list the quantity as 2. So when you go to purchase, you'll just have to select that you want to purchase 1 or you want to purchase 2 of them. But that will be the easiest way for me to do this rather than have to take a picture of both of them, and then that might confuse people. So it will look like there's one of these in the shop, but if you go to the drop down menu, it will have quantity of 2. So this one is like a tan, peach, periwinkle blue, and it's got some gold on there. And then my favorite part about this is the purple. I love this purple pom-pom. Again, I don't think this is vintage. This seems pretty new, but I got it at when I found that Walmart sack at a thrift store of all these trims. So love this one. And then it just happened to go so well with my vintage sheet tie that I have here. And again, you're going to see a lot of the fraying, and that's why I have string all over me and all over my house and all over the kitchen, because that's the whole point of these journals, is I want them to look, whoops, there we go. I want them to look worn and tattered and frayed and just well loved. Okay, so here's probably a good time to talk about, because I don't want anybody to freak out thinking that their journals are frayed and that eventually all the material will be gone. No, that is not the case. I also want to point out that these guys, while they look delicate and tattered and worn, they are very durable. That is one thing I am super sensitive about, is the journals. I want them to be durable. If it was a journal that I was going to use, how durable would I need to make it? That is exactly what I think of whenever I make journals to sell. I want them to be very, very durable, because I am hard on my journals, and I can only imagine true artists and stuff, that they're probably very hard on their journals, and I would never want anybody to think that their journal is going to fall apart. So just to show you the integrity of the journals, while it is made with that heavy cardstock from the calendar pages, what I did here on this spine is I have actually doubled it. So you have there's going to be 2 strips of this cardstock. They are glued together with some heavy duty glue. You have the fabric over top, which all the fabric has been glued onto the actual cardstock. And then on the inside, I took a piece of the vintage sheet that's actually the same as the tie for each of the journals, and it has been Mod Podged onto this little spine area right here. So you've got 4 layers of strength plus 3 layers of glue, all in just this spine area right here. So this isn't going anywhere. On some of the spines on the other side where I did not do any stitching, I did reinforce with, sometimes you'll see some fabric or a piece of paper over on this side. For the wallpaper pockets that I have, they were glued in, and then they were also stitched in. And then all of the journals are stitched around the edges so that your fabric won't fray. Once it gets down to the part where the stitching starts, your fabric will not fray. Most of the fabric is going to stay right where it's at. You're not going to have a super amount of fraying like that the whole thing falls apart. Definitely not going to have that. You will just have little bits that will stick out, and they just add character to it. So again, I just wanted to make sure you understand that this is, while it's a soft journal, it is very sturdy, and I have made sure that the integrity is very much intact, and that this would be a journal that you could use every single day and use lots of different journaling techniques in and not have to worry about it falling apart. This is a light blue, brown, green floral sheet, and it has the most hideous ruffle that I am sure is straight out of the 1980s. And I've had this in my stash for a couple of months, and I was just like, it is so ugly. It's beautiful. And it works perfectly on these journals when I partnered them up with this vintage sheet. I mean, that just looks, it looks like they were meant to be. Okay, so remember the angel lace? There you go. There's its wings. Cut it apart and it became a pocket. So this one has some yellow stitching, and then it's got a lime green where I stitched in the signatures. So that's, I've two different ones that are a blue brown. So I'll show you this one. This is blue, brown, and green with the 1980s ruffle. I'm loving blues and browns right now. So this one is a blue brown, and it's got some green, but I pulled on its pinks and peaches. So let me just show you this lace. Oh my gosh, I could like touch this all day long. It's actually layered. There's a piece of like cotton fabric underneath this lace, and then what I did was I stitched it to a wide piece of just some trim, oh, it looked like a lattice type of trim. So it's been stitched onto this. And then the fabric, the sheet that it came from, has some pinks and some peaches in it. So that's the color of stitching that I did, was the pink here, because I just thought, God, what a beautiful color combination. And so this one has a red pocket and this one has a blue pocket. And then I just kind of got crazy with my stitches and did some fun stitching. So yeah, there's another blue brown, but this one has the pink stitches. So this one is a blue, bright green, teal color combination, and I love the fabric that I used here. It was just some of that quilt top scraps, and then here's some pretty fringe, or yeah, I guess it's some sort of like a fringe type of, I just love that. So this fabric was pretty thin, and so what I did was I just went through and I just took some gingham, like this color of green here, and just added a few little patches before I put it onto the cover, just to give it a little bit interest, and I don't know, cover up some of the thin spots, because again, these are sheets. They've been used. They're thin. They've been washed by me multiple times. They have faded a bit, so you know, I just kind of added that as a little bit of interest. And then these guys have this pretty delicate blue hanky as its pocket, and then for a pop of color I just added this red polka dot. And then what did I stitch this in? Oh, I stitched this in a beige. These two are a deeper color. Now this pom-pom fringe, I feel like this is old. This looks much older, and it doesn't feel as synthetic-y as those other ones. So these guys, I love these sheets, and I only had, gosh, I think I only had 2 pillowcases, so I don't have very much of this fabric, but oh my gosh. This was actually from the maker of these vintage sheets. It's called The Company Store. I looked them up. It's kind of a cool little store, but anyway, okay, so it's this pink color, and I did this gaudy, I'm going to go ahead and call it gaudy gold yellow. I don't know, there's something about it. I thought it worked really well. And the stitching I used was yellow, and then I used a maroon color for my hand stitching. And on the insides of this, there's some floral pockets, because I thought it kind of went with the rose theme, and it's got some purples and stuff in it. So love this. And then this is just a piece of some fabric that I had scraps of. This one, funny story about this one. So my fabric recycling store was going out of business, and so that's where I got a lot of my trims and fabric and stuff, was when they were going out of business. And the owner had this piece hanging on the wall, and just kind of like with that quilt top that was wonky, she's like, why, I can't believe you haven't bought this yet. It was like this weird piece. I don't even know what it was used for. It was almost like it was a vest that had never been finished, but it was all of this hand stitching with these little mirrors in it. I don't know. It was very weird. I've still got some of it left. And it was sitting, you know, there, and she just kept saying to me every time I go in, she's like, I can't believe you haven't bought that yet. And I'm like, I just don't know what I would do with it. So anyway, I ended up and bought it. And when I started making these journals and I was looking for some trim to go with this fabric, I saw that crazy mirrored hand stitched, I don't even know. And I was like, oh my gosh, they go perfect together. So here's the sheet, and it's totally, you can totally tell it's vintage. And then I put this crazy, I don't even know, it's not patchwork, it's just like, just crazy. It's just crazy. And it's kind of like gypsy fabric, I think. I think people use the word boho and stuff like that. It just, I don't know, it's kind of groovy. So I put that on there. I put a little piece of some lace, and then there's the pockets for each one of those. So those are kind of cool. I love, this is so springy. So again, with this 1980s ruffle that I just could not figure out how to use it, it just seemed to go really well with this fabric. This is some of my favorite sheet fabric. I actually have 2 or 3 of these. This was my tablecloth when I had my craft booth, and this was one of my tablecloth. Actually, several of these were some of my tablecloths from my craft booth. But anyway, so this was one of my favorite ones, and it's just got the butterflies and totally the retro, the avocado green, the orange, the yellow. Again, there were just some bare spots, and so I put some little, they were kind of faded, and so I put some little patchwork there just to kind of add a little bit of interest. And then I put the 1980s ruffle going down the front. I put a little piece of turquoise lace on that, and then this trim, oh my gosh, now this is old. It's beautiful. I can't even explain anything other than it's just beautiful. It's needlework. I don't know if it was hand done or machine done, but the green and the off-white just went really well. And then I just put a piece of orange down here. And then when you open it up, there's the pocket. This one it had been pink with pinking shears, so I didn't have to sew any trim on it, but I did sew a little bit of lace on this one, and really like how these turned out. I love these colors. The stitches on this one was I did like a spring green. Okay, holy moly. All right, so there were my 24 Forlorn Fabric Journals. And so now let's talk, when am I going to put these in the shop? So today is Sunday, March, I don't even know what today is. Sunday, March, whatever. And here's what we're going to do. It's going to take me, I got to go back to work tomorrow. So this is going to becomes my side hustle. I've got to get pictures taken, and I got to get them listed on Etsy. And I also have to stuff the pockets, which I'm going to tell you what I'm going to stuff the pockets with here in just a second. So let's go. Let's see. Next weekend is Easter. Okay, so I want to put these in my shop on Thursday of this week. I want to do Thursday at 7 p.m. So Thursday, the day before Good Friday at 7 p.m. And that will be Central Time. We're on daylight savings, so just Central Time, Kansas City, Missouri, USA. 7 p.m. I will list all 24 of them in my shop. And yeah. And I'll be posting on Instagram all week long and stuff like that, and just give you some more sneak peeks. Okay, so what am I going to stuff the pockets with? Okay, here's what I'm sticking in the pockets. Wallpaper. Tons and tons and tons of wallpaper. So I've been getting ready for I want to offer some wallpaper packs in my shop, and so I've been working on cutting these down and figuring out how I want to organize them and how I want to get them packaged and how I want to sell them and stuff like that. Oh man, dusty. So anyway, I have this box that I started about, I don't know, 4 weeks ago and just shoved them all in a box because I don't know, it was kind of like, my brain kind of goes from one thing to the other. So anyway, I was sitting here thinking about what could I put in those journals, and it's already got so much paper and so many pockets and envelopes. And I thought about, why not just stuff it full of wallpaper? So what I'm going to do is, in the pockets, I am going to put wallpaper in the pockets. Lots and lots of wallpaper. So you can use this as you are journaling in your Forlorn Fabric Journals. Guys, thanks for hanging out with me. I know this has been a really long video, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Remember, Thursday at 7 p.m., the day before Good Friday, I'll actually look up the date and I'll put it in the description below. I will put my journals in my Etsy shop. Have a great rest of the day. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy, and I hope you guys do something creative. Bye.